What if the greatest limitation in your life isn't your fear? What if it isn't your past, or your anxiety, or even the circumstances you're trying so desperately to change? What if the greatest limitation is something far quieter? A story you've repeated so many times that you've stopped questioning whether it's true. Maybe you've whispered it to yourself without even noticing. I'm just an anxious person. I've never been confident. This is simply who I am. Those words feel harmless, but every time you repeat them, they sink a little deeper. Until one day, they stop describing your experience and begin defining your identity. Without realizing it, you build invisible walls around your own life. Not because someone trapped you there, but because you became convinced the walls had always existed. And perhaps that is the greatest illusion of all. Thousands of years ago, the Hermetic masters preserved a teaching that challenges this illusion with remarkable simplicity, not by telling you to become someone else, but by asking a question that almost no one asks. What if you've never truly been the person you believe you are? Imagine an old sculptor walking through a silent quarry. Around him stand enormous blocks of marble. To everyone else, they are nothing more than stone, heavy, cold, lifeless. But every morning, the old man stops in front of one particular block. He gently places his hand upon it, smiles, and quietly says, "There you are." His apprentice watches in confusion. Days pass before he finally gathers the courage to ask, "Master, who are you talking to?" The old man doesn't answer. Instead, he lifts his chisel. The first strike echoes through the valley. A small fragment falls, then another dot, then another dot. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Slowly, something extraordinary begins to appear. A human figure, elegant, powerful, as though it had always been waiting inside the stone. The apprentice stares in disbelief. "How did you create something so beautiful?" The sculptor smiles. "I didn't create it. I simply removed everything that wasn't the statue." Perhaps that story has never been about marble. Perhaps it has always been about you. Most people spend their lives trying to build confidence, build peace, build courage, as though these qualities didn't already exist, as though they had to be invented. But what if they don't? What if the person you've spent your entire life searching for has been hidden beneath layers of fear, conditioning, and stories you've mistaken for truth? If that's true, then transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about uncovering what has always been there. This is where one of the deepest principles of the Kybalion begins. It tells us that everything has two poles. At first, that sounds familiar, light and darkness, hot and cold, success and failure, but the teaching goes much deeper than that. It suggests that what we call opposites are not truly separate. They are different degrees of the same reality. Think about temperature. Can anyone point to the exact moment when cold becomes heat? Of course not, because they are not two different forces. They are 2 points on the same scale. Now imagine that this law doesn't apply only to temperature. Imagine it applies to your inner world. Perhaps fear and courage are not enemies. Perhaps they are different degrees of the same energy. Perhaps insecurity and confidence belong to the same spectrum. Perhaps anxiety and inner peace are not separated by an impossible distance, but connected by countless small steps. If that's true, then something remarkable happens. The question is no longer, who am I? The question becomes, where am I? Where am I on the scale of my own consciousness? That single shift changes everything, because identities feel permanent. Locations do not. You don't say, "I will live on this street forever." You simply recognize where you are, and then, if you choose it, shattered an old story. The story that kept saying, "This is who I am." You move. Maybe consciousness works the same way. Maybe fear isn't who you are. Maybe it's where you've been standing for longer than you realized. And locations can change. That is why some people seem completely transformed after a single experience. It wasn't the experience that created a new person. It shattered an old story. The story that kept saying, "This is who I am." Every transformation begins there, not when life changes, but when the story changes. Because the mind will always defend the identity it believes to be true, even if that identity causes suffering. It is strangely comforting to believe, "I've always been this way," because certainty feels safer than possibility. Possibility demands responsibility. It asks you to admit that tomorrow does not have to look like yesterday, and that can be terrifying, but it can also be the beginning of freedom. Maybe that is why so many people never change, not because change is impossible, but because they confuse a temporary state with a permanent identity. The moment you say, "I am my fear," you stop looking for courage. The moment you believe, "I am broken," you stop searching for what is whole. Without realizing it, you begin protecting the very prison you wish to escape. But the principle of polarity offers a completely different perspective. It doesn't ask you to fight your darkness. It asks you to see it differently. Because wherever one pole exists, the other already exists as a possibility. Think about that for a moment. Every person you've ever admired, every wise teacher, every calm and compassionate soul, has also known fear, confusion, pain. The difference wasn't that they were born with something you lack. The difference was the direction they chose to walk. Perhaps consciousness has never been about becoming. Perhaps it has always been about moving. One thought, one choice. One moment of awareness at a time. Imagine standing at the edge of the ocean. The surface is restless. Waves rise without warning. Some are gentle, others crash with incredible force. If you've only ever looked at the surface, you might believe the ocean itself is chaotic. But dive just a little deeper, and everything changes. The deeper you go, the quieter it becomes. The waves still exist, but they no longer control your experience. Maybe your mind is exactly the same. Most of us spend our lives trapped on the surface. A compliment makes us feel valuable. A criticism makes us doubt ourselves. One success fills us with confidence. One failure convinces us we're not enough. We become prisoners of emotional weather, always reacting, always moving from one extreme to the other. But what if your thoughts are only the waves, and not the ocean? What if awareness itself remains untouched beneath every emotion you've ever experienced? That possibility changes everything, because awareness doesn't panic, it notices panic. Awareness doesn't become angry, it observes anger. Awareness isn't broken by fear, it simply witnesses fear passing through. For the first time, you stop asking, how do I become someone else? And you begin asking, what is keeping me from seeing who I already am? That is a very different journey. The sculptor never fought the marble, he trusted what was hidden inside it. Perhaps your life has been asking you to do the same. Maybe every disappointment, every failure, every season of uncertainty hasn't been trying to punish you. Perhaps it has been removing another layer of stone, revealing something you couldn't see before. Not because suffering is necessary, but because awareness often begins where certainty ends. And maybe that is why the ancient Hermetic masters insisted that true transformation always begins within. Not because the outside world is an illusion, but because every experience is filtered through the consciousness that perceives it. Change the consciousness, and the world begins to look different. Not because reality has changed, but because you have. So before this journey comes to an end, ask yourself one final question. If fear is not your identity, if anxiety is not your identity, if your past is not your identity, then who would you become? If you stopped telling yourself the story you've believed for so many years, perhaps the answer has been waiting quietly beneath the surface all along. Waiting not to be created, but to be revealed. And perhaps that is the deepest meaning of the principle of polarity. You are not defined by where your consciousness stands today, but always meant to uncover. In the next chapter of the Kybalion, we'll explore another timeless principle that explains why life seems to move in cycles. Why we rise, fall, and so often return to the same patterns, but always meant to uncover. In the next chapter of the Kybalion, we'll explore another timeless principle that explains why life seems to move in cycles, why we rise, fall, and so often return to the same patterns. It is known as the principle of rhythm, and once you understand it, you'll never experience the highs and lows of life in quite the same way again. Until then, remember this: you are not the story you've been repeating. You are the awareness capable of writing a new one.